Everybody, thank you for joining me for another video. As I promised, I would be doing some short stories, and the first story I'm going to begin with is Berry, and Berry is by Langston Hughes. As I said before, I will not be going into any analysis or discussion. If there are any questions that you may have and you'd like to leave them in the comment section, I will be very happy to read them and respond to you. All right, so the first short story we are beginning with is Berry. It says, when the boy arrived on the 4 o'clock train, lo and behold, he turned out to be colored. Mrs. Osborne saw him the minute he got out of the station wagon, but certainly there was nothing to be done about it that night, with no trains back to the city before morning. So she set him to washing dishes. Lord knows, there were a plenty. The Scandinavian kitchen boy had left right after breakfast, giving no notice, leaving her and the cook to do everything. Her wire to the employment office in Jersey City brought results, but dark ones. The card said his name was Milbury Jones. Well, where was he to sleep? Heretofore, the kitchen boy and the handyman, gardener, chauffeur, shared the same quarters. But Mrs. Osborne had no idea how the handyman might like Negroes. Help were so touchy, and it was hard keeping good servants in the country. So right after dinner, leaving Milbury with his arms in the dishwater, Mrs. Osborne made a beeline across the side lawn for Dr. Renfield's cottage. She heard the kids laughing and playing on the big screened-in front porch of the sanatorium. She heard one of the nurses say to a child, "Behave, Billy," as she went across the yard under the pine and maple trees. Mrs. Osborne hoped Dr. Renfield would be on his porch. She hated to knock at the door and perhaps be faced with his wife. The gossip among the nurses and help at Dr. Renfield's summer home for crippled children had it that Mrs. Osborne was in love with Dr. Renfield, that she just worshipped him, that she followed him with her eyes every chance she got, and not only with her eyes. Of course, there wasn't a word of truth in it, Mrs. Osborne said to herself, admitting at the same time that Martha Renfield, his wife, was certainly not good enough for the doctor. Anyway, tonight, she was not bound on any frivolous errand towards the doctor's cottage. She had to see him about this Negro in their midst. At least, they'd have to keep him there overnight or until they got somebody else to help in the kitchen. However, he looked like a decent boy. Dr. Renfield was not home. His wife came to the door, spoke most coldly, and said that she presumed, as usual, the doctor would make his rounds at the home at 8. She hoped Mrs. Osborne could wait until then to see him. Good evening. Mrs. Osborne went back across the dusk-dark yard. She heard the surf rushing to the beach below and saw the new young moon rising. She thought maybe the doctor was walking along the sea in the twilight alone. Ah, Dr. Renfield, Dr. Ren. When he made the usual rounds at 8, he came, for a moment, by Mrs. Osborne's little office where the housekeeper held forth over her linens and her accounts. He turned his young but bearded face toward Mrs. Osborne, cast his great dark eyes upon her, and said, "I hear you'd asked to see me." Yes, indeed, Dr. Renfield. Mrs. Osborne bubbled and gurgled. We have a problem on our hands. You know, the kitchen man left this morning, so I sent a wire to the high class help agency in the city for somebody right away by the 4 o'clock train. And they sent us a Negro. He seems to be a nice boy and all that, but I just don't know how he would fit in our home. Now, what do you think? The doctor looked at her with great seriousness. He thought. Then he answered with a question. Do the other servants mind? Well, I can't say they do. They got along all right tonight during dinner. But the problem is, where would he sleep? Oh, yes, Dr. Renfield pursing his lips. And whether we should keep him all summer or just till we get someone else. I see, said Dr. Renfield. And again he thought, you say he can do the work? How about the attic in this building? It's not in use. And by the way, how much did we pay the other fellow? $10 a week, said Mrs. Osborne, raising her eyes. We'll pay the darky 8, said Dr. Renfield, and I've enjoyed this section of the story. There are some things that jump out at us. How do you think they feel about black people? And what term is used in there to describe somebody who is black? What's a term? And another thing, we do not have to guess how Mrs. Osborne feels about Dr. Renfield. All right, so join me and keep listening. Au revoir.